This is part two of Building Dwelling Thinking by Martin Heidegger, as found in David Krell's 1990s basic writings. If you have not heard the first one, I will summarize what went on there. But part of my reading style here is to go through the process of working out ideas while we read and while we talk. For one thing, reading can be quite passive, and that's really wonderful when our minds begin to think while we read. It can be meditative, it can be very nurturing and very amazing and wonderful. But this kind of work that I'm doing is to demonstrate or provide or to give the willing and the interested an experience of working with complicated text and complicated ideas and going through the iterative process of working with a technology like writing. So I suggest that you check out the first one. But if not, or we just need a reminder of what we were doing because we were iterating and working out, I will do that. Firstly, I do this for a few reasons, and some I probably don't know. I received a comment that I removed. Which had to do with Heidegger's political past and some very complicated decisions that he made. There's a lot of research and talk about it, especially in this time that we live in. And I appreciate comments and I will respond, but if they are comments that don't engage in what's being offered, and they're just meant to, in a narcissistic way, which is social media is pretty good at bringing out in us, in a narcissistic way, insult or aggrandize and then bust apart. I just won't have anything to do with it. But substantive questions, I'm willing to entertain, the ones that I can. And I'm just happy to share, and I'm happy to think through this text with you and the willing. Okay, in the first reading, we only made it through a few pages. I gave some context and foreground. Context and foreground is important, in interpreting text. There's essentially two ways to interpret a text. One is the sort of informational aspect of it, the technical elements of the writing, grammar, equivocations. Even in some cases, you can have pentameter of speech. How to reflect a pentameter of speech, the dynamics, and then there are other things with that as well. But then there is the understanding, and I'm thinking of Hans-Georg Gadamer, a philosopher who lived in Gadamer's time and who was inspired, I suppose, or influenced by Heidegger. And Gadamer makes this distinction in Truth and Method, I believe, that understanding is a kind of toward this fusing of horizons. For me, I feel that understanding is more just a personal thing. I have certain ideas about language, right? And that's where I began. I don't think that language is everything. I suppose that language doesn't suppose us. I put it that way. There is an exterior to language which is probably found within it. I might not be the first one to say that, but that is the perspective to which I come from. But in Heidegger and up through Jacques Derrida, in particular to this text, I mean, there's clear links here to Derrida's ideas. There is this sort of inheritance of the idea that language is total in a way, right? That language constructs and deconstructs in its own sort of autonomous way, and that we have this sort of experience with it. I have a difference there, and differences are good, but that was part of my foregrounding. I also rely on poets to help me read philosophy, because not only do they offer a kind of life for philosophy, but that poetry and philosophy are deeply connected. And I'm not talking about slam poetry or all of the commercialization and institutionalization of poetry and the state acting poet and the poet laureate and the poet this and that. I'm talking more about, if in a contemporary example, who would be a great lyric poet today? Kool Keith. If you've never heard of Dr. Artagon or Kool Keith, he's a phenomenally interesting lyric poet who is a poet, right? I would think of some other examples, in particular to hip hop, in particular to the 90s, although Kool Keith is still active, but I don't need to go through a litany. Other great poets, of course, that end up in music. You know, I do have a sort of poetry, and I should call it poetry and unpopular culture, because most of the strongest poets that I find relevant are not very popular. Maybe Kool Keith is popular. I mean, he's definitely cult. He's definitely keeping it underground real, and of a high order of a lyric poet. I really want to study his lyrics more and discuss them, but that will take some research. At any rate, so language, I was talking about the difference between language and consciousness. I find it problematic that if language is everything, right, that what's that mean for consciousness? And so that was the first thing. Then there was the abridgments between dwelling and building in Heidegger, which I made analogous to what Wallace Stevens, the poet, says are a relationship between fact and miracle. So back to Gadamer, it could be interpretation and understanding, right? And at any rate, when it comes to language and its exterior, I'm interested in certain instances of perturbances, right? And that consciousness is often official and unofficial consciousness. And that I also put it out there that technology today, communication technology today, is pushing us to reconsider the limits of what consciousness is or not conscious. So technology is this part of this abridgment, glimpses between other types of consciousness, which is generally awareness, right? Awareness, which allows one to manipulate. A language without consciousness, right, would be a language without form, right? It's pure content, right? So technology is I'll put this out there too, is a type of archaic in a way, or arcane, even mystifying abridgment between consciousness that allows other consciousness to be validated within language. And since we have consciousness as well, we have this ability to give form to this content, or recognize the form out of that content. And this really comes down to the life of the mind, the Noad Vital, and where we actually dwell. Because that was the question Heidegger was raising. That's one that I'm vamping on. And it comes down to, other sort of key concepts today. Anthropocentrism or not, right? Is the human that important? That was something else that I had brought up. We have to consider that. And we have to have the happy experience of thinking that, even if that involves some pain. But when we do, we source the means, I suppose, to survive, right? And this now is more so of the mind, and not supposed ultimately by language as defined, right? So I had already mentioned that Heidegger and tacitly Derrida and their claim that there's no exterior to language, I find problematic. I mentioned Jean-Francois Lyotard and the inhuman, and that our mental life is changing, and there's new considerations. And then I also said, look, I think this question of where we dwell and what it means to be, again, from Wallace Stevens, thinking with Wallace Stevens, what it means to be a specialist in dwelling in the mind. And I think the poets, certain very strong poets of thought, offer that. Okay, Heidegger brings up the Gewohnte, which is a question of what philosophy considers the habitus, or certain regions of philosophy. And I have a question there, is if this habitus is actually a passage, right? So I'm asking this when Heidegger is telling us that, hey, I want to understand how building belongs to dwelling, how they're interlinked, but they're not destined, right? They can split apart, right? They're not always synonymous, right? But to build is to dwell in general, right? And that's where he really doubles down on language. He's like, look, language provides, this essence, and it remains the master of man. Language's own essence, he says, we have to understand it. Okay, if we have to understand it, then that would mean that to understand language's own essence, you cannot suppose that the essence of language is firstly consciousness, right? That language is an ultimate absolute, then I suppose you could, but it's problematic, right? But at any rate, language's essential being is driven into alienation. That's what Heidegger's always on about here. And that he says language is everywhere the highest and always the first, right? So I don't think so. For me, it's consciousness, right? But here's where we're drawing this kind of distinction now. So for me, in time, perhaps it's the experience of consciousness, which is outside of language, running through language, appearing within language, and that perhaps what we call language, what we've coded and made laws and grammar and rules and history of language, right, is firstly a social and culturally specific technology, but it's also a way for us to accept the hard problem of consciousness. Right, that language is the result of consciousness, and that if we subordinate the understanding of consciousness to language, meaning language is everything, there's a big problem there. I might be a wacko, who knows? This is my idea. Okay, so there's a special relation then that Heidegger's talking about. So something that moves dwelling, in my view, into conscious thought, right? So when Stevens, I go back to Wallace Stevens again, and I'm talking about shaping. Shaping is not the same thing, says Stevens, as the constancy of shape, okay? The constancy of shape means an object that is constantly that shape, right? So in this way, if we think of consciousness according to language, we're thinking of the shape of consciousness according to language, its rules, but not its constancy, which would be in some sense infinite, or some sense completely and totally transforming, adjusting its form to the point where it doesn't have a form but its form, which is this constancy, right? So that's part of the problem, right? But for Heidegger, language is the master of man, and this has cultural specific reasons, right? Because of that word bauen, right? Or building. So this is a cultural construct. It's pro-German, right? And Hitler's impact on Heidegger's life, in the Nazi regime's impact on Heidegger's life, is relevant, I think, but not in the way that when we get into that, it takes a lot of knowledge building to understand exactly how complicated Heidegger's situation was. I'm not a Heideggerian anyway, and I'm not an apologist for Heidegger. He did some dumb stuff, but I don't think that, I think that what Heidegger wanted to get out of the early 1930s was driven by his passion and love for philosophy, and seeing that manifest beyond the state. It was Heidegger's big mistake. And other philosophers have made this mistake in ancient history and currently. So we have to understand the disposition, perhaps the persona improperia, the person there, right? And that's impossible to do because he's gone, but we can get a good approximation. So when we walk into our hermeneutic phase here and try to have understanding, we have to set this stuff in a particular place and say, I'm not just going to step all over this, okay? This is a difficult one. But what we can see in Build, Indwelling, and Thinking is that he's using a cultural construct. Language is the master of man, right? And he wants to restore it. And it does seem romantic. It does have a nationalistic element to it. And I think that there's plenty of room here for furtive conversation. But again, the political dynamic here has been well documented, and it's very complicated. I suggest you go check it out. I'm not going to discuss it here. I want to see what we can do with Heidegger now, although he's a good reminder for somebody like Dugin or other, whether or not you think Dugin's a fool, or Paul de Man or whoever supported Alain Badiou, who's ever supported something, then I think we need to understand that without them, we don't have an understanding of human thought, right? We would be missing that. So there's something here to note. Okay, so I'm almost to the end of my recap. So Heidegger is using a cultural construct. I already get nervous about that. I don't like it. I don't like the cultural arguments to take precedent over something like the difference between consciousness and language. The difference, because it gets very, very specific and very hardened. But the cultural argument is on the German language, and he goes through that. So I'm about recapping to 350 now, and we're going to start reading once more. Heidegger mentions something about ships and temples, right? That these aren't just ordinary buildings; they build something else, and he's getting toward this genuine building, right? Genuine building is dwelling. Gewohnte. It's habitual. We inhabit, right? We inhabit genuine building. So there's buildings that build that build something else as the buildings, right? And genuine building is dwelling. Dwelling what? Where? And so he's talking about the Gewohnte, the habitual that we inhabit. Okay. He says something more about the Gewohnte. There's something going on in the manifold ways in which dwelling is accomplished, right? And he says they take the name, such as bauen. So he's concerned about dwelling falling into oblivion, and he mentions a trace, which is, I mean, sure, people can argue whether or not Derrida took it from him here or not. It doesn't matter. It's the same thing in a very general sense. There is a trace, and it would lead us to understand the power and structure of language, right? So I see in Heidegger a restorative purpose to return us to dwelling by getting into this, attaching to this trace. Now, the trace, I'm not going to go into how Derrida is talking about the trace specifically because that would be distracting. Derrida is very difficult to read. It takes a while, but he's fascinating, just a genius writer, and maybe sometimes slips out of control a little bit. I'd have a great time reading him. But what I do want to note here is that the trace might also be a type of abridgment. The trace might be something more than language. It might be the threads between language and consciousness. It could be the logos, right? The big logos. So we see here why this is such an important text for what becomes called continental philosophy, and how language was such a massive affinity for this time in philosophy, and still is. But I'm more interested in consciousness, but this is really important stuff. Okay, so we're on 350. And I'm in the center paragraph. Heidegger says, That language, in a way, retracts the proper meaning of the word bauen, which is dwelling, is evidence of the original one of these meanings. For with the essential words of language, what they genuinely say easily falls into oblivion in favor of foreground meanings. Man has hardly yet pondered the mystery of this process. Language withdraws from man its simple and high speech. But its primal call does not thereby become incapable of speech. It merely falls silent. Man, though, fails to heed this silence. But if you listen to what language says in the word bauen, we hear three things. Building is really dwelling. Dwelling is the manner in which mortals are on earth. Building as dwelling unfolds into the building that cultivates growing things and the building that erects buildings. If you're studying with me and you're hearing me here, I hope you have a copy of this this book, because this is an important shift Heidegger makes. He's telling you, look, language is everything. Trust me, I'm Heidegger, right? And it's through language, right? And now building is really dwelling. Dwelling is the manner in which mortals are on earth. Building as dwelling unfolds into the building that cultivates growing things and the building that erects buildings. Building as dwelling unfolds into the building that cultivates growing things and the building that erects buildings. He calls this a threefold fact, okay? He's saying, look, we cannot really even know what the building of buildings might be in its essence, right? We can't say that all building is dwelling, and that what is the building of buildings, right? The boss of the bosses. We do not dwell because we have built, but we build and have built because we dwell. That is, because we are dwellers. But in what does the essence of dwelling consist? So now we're after the essence of dwelling, right? Here Heidegger takes us back through the German language on 351, top of 351. He's talking about the word for peace or free, frei, which also means to be preserved from harm and danger, safeguarded, protected, right? To free actually means to spare. The sparing itself consists not only in the fact that we do not harm the one whom we spare. Real sparing is something positive and takes place when we leave something beforehand in its own essence, when we return it specifically to its essential being, when we free it in the proper sense of the word into a preserve of peace. To dwell, to be set at peace, means to remain at peace within the free, the preserve, the free sphere that safeguards each thing in its essence. The fundamental character of dwelling is this sparing. It pervades dwelling in its whole range. That range reveals itself to us as soon as we recall that human being consists in dwelling, and indeed dwelling in the sense of the stay of mortals on the earth. Okay. It's fun to read his English translation. This is where Heidegger's bringing in the fourfold, right? Earth, sky, divinities, and mortals, which belong together in one. But this is a one in dwelling, a sort of, it's a one that is a construct, right? It's the sense of the one within a cultural, historical framework, a material sort of thing. The material is the language and the meaning of the word. He's restoring it. He's saying that there is a primal oneness that we can experience as mortals, and mortality is part of that, right? And we live on the earth, right? I like this and I don't like it. What is the sky of Mars, right? What does the sky of Mars mean for the fourfold oneness? It would mean, in some sense, The sky of Mars does exist in our language, but it exists more in our imaginations. It exists more in perhaps a kind of conscious experience, the awareness of the imagination. To think it, right? To think it ethically, right? We could ask the question, should it be at the expense of Earth? I know I am thinking of Elon Musk, of billionaires flying into space, of the Earth being destroyed or transformed, right? The Earth being transformed and rebuilt. Is it natural or is it man-made? These are all the things that come to mind. But he really gets into Earth here. Earth is a serving bearer, blossoming and fruiting, spreading out in rock and water, rising up into plant and animal. When we say Earth, we are already thinking of the other three along with it, but we give no thought to the simple oneness of the four. Earth, sky, divinities, and mortals, which belong together. Right? The sky is the vaulting path of the sun, the course of the changing moon, the wandering glitter of the stars, the year's seasons and their changes, the light and dusk of day, the gloom and glow of night, the clemency and inclemency of the weather, the drifting clouds and the blue depth of the ether. When we say sky, we are already thinking of the other three along with it, but we give no thought to the simple oneness of the four. Okay. Heidegger definitely wants to be some kind of great poet or writer or great poetic prose writer. He's doing it. You know, it's not bad. It's a bit silly. I mean, if you're looking for philosophy and you're reading this, you're like, what the hell? I happen to like it for that reason. But he's got to kind of do this rhetorical stuff here, right? Because he's making historical argument, and when you use something that's almost liturgical like language, and you tie it to the land, and you tie it to the gods, and you tie it to human history, it is a type of liturgical effort to justify the existence of a state, some kind of state, perhaps not the political state that we would think of in the Westphalian sense, but there is this here. Now, is this his clarification of it? We won't know. It might be in other writings that we could read, but it's interesting. I have a side question then. What about the consciousness on Mars then, right? Of the divinities, the sky, Mars, and the mortals, right? How do we see that sky? How do we imagine that sky? With language? With German bauen? Maybe. Anyway, with all the people who want to move to Mars, there's like two of them, maybe Elon Musk is one of them. What does he think of that? I wonder if he even cares. I don't know. Okay, moving that aside. Heidegger goes to the divinities. The divinities are the beckoning messengers of the Godhead. Out of the holy sway of the Godhead, the God appears in his presence or withdraws into his concealment. So again, we have this concealing, right? We had it with language. When we speak, then this primal call is left, right? It falls silence. When we fail to heed this silence, right? Language withdraws from man. And this also happens with the Godhead. When it appears or the presence is there, it withdraws into concealment, right? Continues Heidegger. When we speak of the divinities, we are already thinking of the other three along with them, but we give no thought to the simple oneness of the four. The mortals are the human beings. They are called mortals because they can die. To die means to be capable of death as death. Only man dies, and indeed continually, as long as he remains on earth under the sky before the divinities. When we speak of mortals, we are already thinking of the three other along with them, but we give no thought to the simple oneness of the four. He calls this the Fourfold. I'm on 352, second paragraph. Mortals are in the Fourfold by dwelling. So this Fourfold by dwelling. We are in that, right? He's continuing here. The basic character of dwelling is safeguarding. so they must shelter or protect or guard, right? Mortals dwell in the way they safeguard the fourfold in its essential unfolding accordingly. The safeguarding that dwells is fourfold. So if you're doing this stuff right, you're taking care of these four things in the oneness of dwelling, right? And this is a kind of nugget or manifold of a kind of existence, a factical type of existence in a way, right? We have the liturgical reasoning, the proof, it's in the language. There is this oneness, okay? And there's these cultural reasons for that. There is this ultimate language we can't get outside of, so we must dwell with a fourfold, and it becomes a kind of construct, which could be of the polis, of course, of the political, right? So, safeguarding that dwells is fourfold. Mortals dwell in the way they safeguard the fourfold in its essential unfolding. So it unfolds, of course, in time, and the safeguarding that dwells is fourfold. Okay, so there's a type of peace or a type of, so this feels a bit Platonic to me, imminently. Mortals dwell in that they save the earth. Taking the word in the old sense still known to Lessing, I think it's Lessing's, yeah. Saving does not only snatch something from a danger. To save properly means to set something free into its own essence. To save properly means to set something free into its own essence. So what withdraws, right? What withdraws means to set something free in its essence. We know by its essence that it has withdrawn, right? And we know it because it's withdrawn from us, but we know its essence. To save the earth is more than to exploit it or even wear it out. Saving the earth does not master the earth and does not subjugate it, which is merely one step from boundless spoliation. This is what my teacher and longtime mentor calls the green Heidegger, I think, right? And the green Heidegger here is the guy who really likes earth. Heidegger is no hippie, but he's got some hippie. He's got some OG hippie vibes here. But saving the earth is not wearing it out, right? Part of me thinks that wearing it out, even if this is a very Christian sort of thought that, you know, of dominion, right? The earth is ours. Right, the animals are ours, right? And now, you know, it's, and that's not for all of Christian thought, right? But this is an old school sort of thinking that, you know, we are on top, and we can do with what we want, with what was given to us or whatever, right? But here, it's quite a how to put it. It's an assumption that we could wear it out, right? I think it's kind of silly, actually. Even Heidegger, we're not going to wear the earth out by what we see today, at least in scholarship, right? By the Anthropocene, right? We are leaving an embossment, but that just again comes back to the human, non-human, anthropocentric, non-anthropocentric. It's just a process of nature, right? It's again not considering awareness, right? Even the problems of awareness. You take something like climate change, which is a tough one. Well, why don't you do something for the climate and for the environment? And you know, this planet is super important, and it's the only one we got. And are we really aware of it, though? Right? So you can say and talk and have all the political stuff you want, but the consciousness, the quality of consciousness that we have in relation to the earth is just not there yet. And it might not be up to us that it emerges when it becomes legible to awareness. But as technologies are rapacious things set forth by the subjective intent of human beings, now achieving their apparently own iterations of what that subjective intent is, we might be experiencing abridgments to consciousness, which gives us the awareness. Okay, well, look at the climate models. Oh, that's terrible science. So look at anything that's controversial between scientific knowledge and public policy. The technology is always driving the knowledge forward, and it's driving the policy forward, to the point where technology is now driving consciousness in a new direction. So I'm trying to situate here where to save Earth is more than to exploit it or even wear it out. Well, we can't wear it out, right? I think so we have to look at Heidegger in a contemporary lens. Saving the Earth does not master the Earth and does not subjugate it. Who has ever subjugated the Earth? We haven't proven that yet. We can calculate, but even if there was a nuclear war, it would not subjugate Earth. It would be burnt up and not cool, but things would go on, just not with us, right? So I'm taking a moment there because I want to differentiate. I want to chop out a bit about some of these areas in Heidegger where I think he could do better. And I think if we're going if we really want to learn from Heidegger, and we really want to understand what this incredibly interesting and intelligent, controversial figure in philosophy has contributed, what he's really saying and what we really could learn from him, we have to go through this process. Mortals dwell in that they receive the sky a sky. They leave to the sun and the moon their journey, to the stars their courses, to the seasons their blessing and their inclemency. They do not turn night into day, nor day into a harassed unrest. Mortals dwell in that they await the divinities as divinities. In hope, they hold up to the divinities what is unhoped for. They wait for imitations of their coming and do not mistake the signs of their absence. They do not make their gods for themselves and do not worship idols. In the very depth of misfortune, they wait for the wheel, W-A-E-L, that has been withdrawn. Mortals dwell in that they initiate their own essential being, their being capable of death as death, into the use and practice of this capacity so that there may be a good death. Okay, so remember, Heidegger says, look, ships and buildings, these things actually do something else. Yes, they're creating perhaps a type of being, right? And now he's saying, look, because the gods withdraw, human beings wait, and we've been producing this being. So here I want to tie my concept of abridgment, that technology is showing consciousness other let's say examples or expressions of consciousness outside of language that nonetheless has to be dealt with inside the language, but it's here Heidegger sees that being, right, is being produced by buildings. It could be the factical human that is producing being as well, and that there is perhaps an abridgment here to consider. So this complicated movement of withdrawal, close enough to what the sway was in the question concerning technology. Do you remember the sway? That's even more interesting. I mean, the question concerning technology is pretty fascinating. The actual is what withdraws there. So you can't even understand things actually, and that the sway will make it legible. But the sway is also something that we just have to feel. You get the same thing going on here. This is Heideggerian philosophy. This withdrawal, right? So we create our own being out of will, right? And we can have a good death. To initiate mortals into the essence of death in no way means to make death as the empty nothing the goal, nor does it mean to darken dwelling by blindly staring toward the end. In saving the earth and receiving the sky and awaiting the divinities and initiating mortals, dwelling appropriates as the fourfold preservation of the fourfold. To spare and preserve means to take under our care, to look after the fourfold in its essence. The fourfold in its essence. Right? What is the fourfold in its essence? Right? The simple oneness of the four we call the fourfold. Mortals are in the fourfold by dwelling, but the basic character of dwelling is safeguarding. Mortals dwell in the way they safeguard the fourfold in its essential unfolding. Accordingly, the safeguarding that dwells is fourfold. Back to 352 for a minute. Back to 353. To spare and preserve means to take under our care, to look after the fourfold in its essence. We must now look after the fourfold. This is what Heidegger is saying. Now you have an obligation. You're producing being, you have an obligation, right? What we take under our care must be kept safe, but if dwelling preserves the fourfold, where does it keep the fourfold's essence? How do mortals make their dwelling such a preserving? Mortals would never be capable of it if dwelling were merely a staying on earth under the sky before the divinities among mortals. Rather, dwelling itself is always a staying with things. Dwelling as preserving keeps the fourfold in that which mortals stay in things. Staying with things, however, is not merely something attached to this fourfold preservation as a fifth something. On the contrary, staying with things is the only way in which the fourfold stay within the fourfold is accomplished at any time in simple unity. Dwelling preserves the fourfold by bringing the essence of the fourfold into things. But things themselves secure the fourfold only when they themselves as things are let be in their essence. Boy, this is a lot of stuff for us to do, Heidegger. How does this happen? He poses the rhetorical question. Well, now we've got a fifth something. Let's back it up here. To spare and preserve means to take under our care, to look after the fourfold in its essence. That's what he wants us to do. Now we got to care for this thing. Dwelling itself is always a staying with thing. Dwelling as preserving keeps the fourfold in that with which mortals stay in things. Things, right? On earth. Staying with things, however, is not merely something attached to this fourfold preservation as a fifth something. Okay, it's not a fifth something. On the contrary, staying with things, the things around us. All right? Here again, how do we know? Consciousness. Okay, so now we have an awareness. Staying with things is the only way in which the fourfold stay within the fourfold is accomplished at any time in simple unity. So dwelling preserves the fourfold, right? Dwelling preserves the fourfold by bringing the essence of the fourfold into things. So it's installing it there, right? It's moving into it again. But things themselves are secure. The fourfold, but things themselves secure the fourfold only when they themselves as things are let be in their essence. How do you let them be in their essence? How does this happen? He says, in this way, that mortals nurse and nurture the things that grow, especially construct things that do not grow. Cultivating and construction are building in a narrower sense. Dwelling, in as much as it keeps the fourfold in things, is as this keeping a building. So this is how dwelling is building. Right? With this, we are on our way to the second question. And his second question is, in what way does building belong to dwelling? So, that is a question we will tackle next time. Perhaps I just really want to get to the bridge, because the bridge is just where this really pops. But I keep this one a little shorter than last week, and I'm still thinking about Cool Keith, and I would love to do a Cool Keith video. I have to find the time between the studio and here, but it's totally possible.